Hi, and welcome to Line MUFON, our special program here at Radnor Studio 21. I'm Jennifer Stein, and I'm your host for today's program and all the programs here at Line MUFON. And I have a very, very special guest I'm going to introduce today. So thank you for joining us, ZSun-nee Matema. Let me tell our audience a little bit about your background. ZSun-nee is a cultural mystic, a teaching artist, playwright, columnist, and lecturer. For nearly 30 years, she's directed companies that have paid tribute to the artistry of cultural diversity. ZSun-nee attended Howard University and graduated from the University of the District of Columbia with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Communications. In addition to that, ZSun-nee went on to study and has a bachelor's and a master's in metaphysical and holistic studies from the University of Metaphysical Sciences in California. ZSun-nee gives presentations to national groups on indigenous people and the UFO legacy, and creates theater lab programs for personal transformation. ZSun-nee is a certified clinical hypnosis. She's certified in clinical hypnosis with extensive training as a transactional analysis therapist. She is a post-ground rounds presenter at Howard University Hospital, where she has presented lectures and demonstrations on hypnosis, the bridge that heals. Since childhood, her awareness of dimensions beyond Earth has led her to an artistic interpretation of metaphysical studies and the healing arts. ZSun-nee is a member and a meeting planner for MUFON Maryland, which is how ZSun-nee and I came to meet, because I'm involved with MUFON Pennsylvania, and I've many times come to Baltimore to present, and ZSun-nee and I met there, and that's when I decided I needed to invite her to come here to Philadelphia for our group here. In May of 2012, ZSun-nee founded a new organization in Baltimore called the Baltimore Area Experiencers. And it's a way to assist contactees to share their personal process experiences. And in March, she expanded her dream and launched the ZSun-light Theater. And that's a creative enterprise that will give those with an interest in ufology an opportunity to interact through theater and workshops. So what an extensive background and career, ZSun-nee. You are bridging some very, very important gaps that many people are uncomfortable with the concept of. And from what I understand from meeting you, and I'll explain to our listening audience, that you have partially a Native American background as well as having this expanded personal awareness and this study of metaphysics.
Yes. Well, first of all, let me just say my name, which many people look at because of that ZS, and they say ZSun-nee, but it's ZSun-nee Matema. And but I'll answer to almost anything, But it's just quite interesting because that name was given to me at a ceremony. Matema is a name that comes from one of my ancestors, Cherokee ancestors, and so I've adopted it, and ZSun-nee was given to me in a ritual that I was called into, and I'll be talking about that also this evening when we get together at your meeting. And very well, may I say thank you so much for inviting me, because this is just great. I think what you're doing here is fantastic. You are truly educating people, and I became aware of you just seeing your group advertised, and I thought, wow, this lady is really moving things ahead. And it's good to know, because we have to form that circle of enlightened souls who will teach. So
yes, well, that's what I decided I needed to do. And it was the 1-year anniversary of 9/11, and I just decided there were other things that we need to begin to open our minds to. As we began to explore actually what happened on 9/11, and then from there forward. And I thought if I could do it in my own backyard and begin to share with others. I, of course, had a major craft sighting myself. So once you have a sighting, you just can't put it back in the box anymore and pretend that it didn't happen. And it changes your life perspective from there forward, as other personal experiences can for many people. And from what I understand, you had a very profound experience as a child.
I did.
Which began to open your awareness of the metaphysical world, and that there were other dimensions besides just the dimensions that we live mostly in, or that we all tend to agree that exists.
Exactly.
So I'd like to ask you about that, to explain a little bit about that experience and that event and how it changed you.
Well, you know, until just a few years ago, I did not share it, because when I attempted to share it at school, the teachers and at that time the Catholic priest said that, you know, I should never speak of that kind of thing. I thought everyone was having those experiences, so I just naturally shared mine. But of course, everyone was astonished. This is what they were. They were just shocked, you know. But it happened because I stayed up as a child of 8, 9, 10, and 11 until maybe 1 in the morning reading. I love to read. And one night after I had turned the lights off, I noticed this man or being coming right through the center, or the corner, I should say, of the room. So I wasn't frightened. Everyone says now, well, weren't you frightened? No, not at all. He was well dressed. He had a dark suit on, a white shirt, tie, and the one thing that impressed me most was he had very polished black shoes. So he knew exactly how to, you know, impress me, because I thought that was wonderful. And his vocabulary for me was large, because as a child, my mother never spoke to me of horsey or things like that, and he didn't either. And his vocabulary was beautiful, and he spoke to me, or he didn't speak, but he sent the thoughts from his mind to my mind, and I just picked it all up. And he would instruct me as to where to go to get more information. So that's how it began, and as the evenings were to continue from that point to my first year of high school, he taught me a lot of things. The one thing I remember more than anything was the night that I asked, or he asked me, what would you like to know? And I said, I would like to know the story of good and evil. Where does it come from? How does good and evil come to be? And so he said, well, all right, I have others come to give you that story. And I felt 2 beings come in, and they sat on my bed. I could feel the bed going down a little bit. And the story of good, I really don't remember, which maybe it tells you something. Good is just all-encompassing. I don't remember what that particular being said, but I will never forget what the being said when I looked at evil. He said, evil is an inside job. I will never forget that, because I was astonished. An inside job? He said, you have to generate this. It comes from you, not from the outside in, but the inside out. And I thought, oh, you know, okay. Now I received a lot of information from him about other planets. He talked to me about planes of existence. At the time, I was led to read Scientific America. And as today, I couldn't, when I pick it up, I look at it and I think, this is, I mean, just really the most boring set of, you know, statistics and data. But as a child, I read it, just engulfed it. I just couldn't get enough of it. And I'm thinking now, what was that child? What did they do to impress my mind so that I could receive that information and just digest it the way I was doing, you know? So my mother, though she was a Christian, just allowed this to happen. I was so blessed to have her, so thankful. She never reprimanded me for it. She simply said, you know, what do you need? What would you like to read? And she'd buy books on reincarnation, and she would, and that kind of thing. And of course, later I found out why, because she herself had received visitors, and I did not know this until she was almost on her deathbed. She was in the hospital, and she said to me, you know, I'd like to tell you something. And I said, well, what is it? And she said, well, when I was a teenager, I recall being awakened by a little blue being that would sit on my bed. And he wore some kind of a little turban, she thought, turban-like headdress. And he would say to her, don't be afraid. Everything's going to be all right. And I thought about that, and I said, well, isn't that what all of the ancient people say angels told them? You know, be thee not afraid, or whatever. You know, this is the same kind of comfort that everyone is offered. And as she began to talk about that, I thought, oh my goodness, I've never heard this before. So I said to her, you mean all of my life you've heard me discuss this and wonder about it and you know, sometimes being confounded by it or whatever, and you never, you know, added this little piece because this is important. And of course, you'd have to know my mother, and she simply said, well, I'm telling you now. So that was the end of it, and I knew that I'd gotten as much as I was going to get from her. But it was interesting, and of course, I have since found out that we have had extraordinary experiences with star beings going all the way back to my great-grandmother. So it's sort of in the family. And, you know, but the first day of my high school experience, I was prompted to leave home maybe an hour and a half earlier than I should have. And I know that the reason for that was because this being that had come through the corner of the room wanted to talk with me, and he knew that I would talk with him on the street, and he didn't perhaps want the other high school kids, this is my first year in high school, to look at me and say, well, now that's a strange person. They're coming into, you know, high school. So he just arranged for me to come early. And he said to me, he said, I am going to have to leave you now. So I began weeping because he was like my best friend. He was someone who explained things to me on an adult level that I appreciated, and I didn't want him to go. And he said, because life must teach you now. So I said, well, you know, okay, but of course I wasn't happy. And he did say, I will come back. I will come back 1 or 2 times much later. And with that, he left. And I guess at some point I composed myself. And I walked into the school. And right there from the beginning, there was a young Jewish brother and sister who more or less opened their arms to me. I'd never seen them before in life. And they took me into all of their circles and had me to follow them as they graduated, because they were upperclassmen, and become vice president and then president of the groups as they left and graduated. So I thought, this is kind of really interesting. But there's a story to all of that too. But that's what happened.
Wow, so it's really, so you had a guide that definitely identified himself to you.
He did.
And he wasn't in a dream state, he was...
He just came right through the corner. I did see him much later, much later, after I'd already had my children, and I was living in Silver Spring near Olney, Maryland. And I saw him walk through the dining room. I thought I saw him. I said, I recognize the suit. So I said, and then he came around and he sat in the living room, and he actually materialized from the waist down. And I so much wanted him to show himself completely. But I understand now from gifted psychics and others that it takes so much energy for them to materialize, that I guess he did the best he could. But I was looking at him from the waist down as if he were sitting right there. I could have just reached out and touched him. And I just watched it as if it were a movie, because I was fascinated. So he did, and that, I think he came one more time in a dream, and that was it. And my understanding was that he then had to be reborn himself and re-enter the earth plane, so he had done his job with me. And the story that I understand from a very gifted trans medium, who's now deceased, Reverend George, told me, well, you know, he said, this man and you were together in a Jewish past lifetime where you were in the priest class, and he said that you would sit out in the reeds and you would discuss with him what, you know, that there were star beings and that we were not alone, and he learned from you, and then he came back to teach you. So that was just the beginning. After that, I began to have dreams where I actually saw star beings. So that's how it all, you know, continued from there. Yes.
Wow. Well, that's going to be my next question. I'd like to ask you about what those things were. If you're okay. If you have a tickle in your throat, I do have a little mint with me if it gets bad.
And that, I think I might need that, because I think that seems to do it. I don't know what it is. Is it the weather?
I've had that too. I've had dryness in the back of my throat.
This is so nice. This is like a family show. We also get to talk about homeopathic medicine.
Yes.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
Yes, because I have had occasionally in my life very prophetic dreams where I woke up and I knew that this dream was a metaphor for things going on in my life, and that it was very profound. Every once in a while you wake with an awareness and a memory, and you know that what you've been exposed to is much more profound. But I'm fascinated to learn what some of your dreams were, if you're able to share.
I am. I'm going to have to put this in here. I don't want the audience. I'm so sorry to let's take that out because I can't speak without having it in there. But I think one of the things I learned is this: when you see yourself dressed in period dress from another time, that signifies a past life. So I've had plenty of those. But then I also began to see myself dressed also in, dress other than, the one I was living in. And there were beings who were in ships, and there they were, and they were welcoming me. And in one, I was a man dressed with some kind of a headdress, and I must admit, it did look like something that Jewish people would have worn in that faraway time, but it could have been any group of people who might have been leaders of a group of something. And I was there, and there was an earthquake or something. The ground had broken up, and I found myself on the floor of the ocean. And behind me were like maybe 4 or 5 other men who seemed to be my chief advisors or something of that nature. And I looked ahead of me, and there was a man, blonde. Now, for some reason, the blondes come to me. I don't know what that's all about. And I understand they're called the Palladians. All right.
And
so,
are they also the Nordics? Are
the
they
Nordics.
the same as the Nordics?
So that's right. So they said to come in, and I did approach them, and they had like a clipboard, so to speak. It wasn't a clipboard, but it was something that they were writing on like that. And they sort of checked us off as we went through, as if they were saying, "Oh, hello, nice to see you, nice to see you." So I said to them, excuse me, but my people up there are dying. Do you have a plan for rescuing them? And they said not to worry about them. They will always be in a particular state. Don't remember what type of state it was, but what they were saying was, don't worry about them. The cycle of life will incorporate them too. What we want is for you and these men to come aboard. And I was very worried about that. I challenged them, but you just can't leave a group of, listen to them. They're screaming. And they said, and they were just so kind and, laid back, and they just said, it's all right. We want you to come aboard. So we went aboard, and there's this huge clock-like piece of, I don't know what, that was there just as we came in. And instead of having minutes and hours, it had like years and centuries. And it was clicking around. And we just looked at it, and so we just walked in looking from side to side, like, oh my gosh, what is this? And we sort of walked around this circular kind of, structure, and they were just, welcoming us in. And so I do give another lecture that does discuss all of this. It won't be the one we're doing tonight because we're primarily looking at ancient religions and how the star beings are incorporated in those religions. But it is, it just allowed me to know that we're shown so much through our dreams, and that's an entire lecture that should be given somewhere on how and what dreams mean, and not just to find a particular number that you associate with it, but what the dream is telling you, because it's so vast, the different things that it tells you. And besides that, you have your own dream language, so you have to know your own language.
Everyone has their own symbolism.
That's right. But then as time went on, other things began to happen. One of them was my walking into the Library of Congress. And I was fully an adult then, and I was going to research something. So if you've ever been to the Library of Congress, you know that there's this huge marble floor, and you can actually hear, the footfalls as you go along. So I walked over, and there were the cubicles. People were sitting there doing whatever they were doing. And there was this blonde man who turned around. And he turned around and looked at me. And I was approaching because I was going to the index file, and I stopped. And I was caught in his gaze, and I couldn't move. I just couldn't move. And he smiled. And then in a minute, I just went in like this, okay, and then he just slowly turned around. So I went just maybe 20, not even, maybe 15, 20 feet. And I just went over to the index file, pulled it out, and immediately realized I wasn't going to find the newspaper article there, closed it, and I said, now I'm going to, see who this man is, what was going on. When I turned around, he was completely gone. So I looked at the people sitting beside him on each cubicle because I was thinking, even if I got up right now, you're going to stir a little bit. They had not moved. They were absolutely still. I could not hear one footfall. So he hadn't, where did he go? He was completely gone. Later, I also found out that when people from other dimensions or star beings come into our dimension, they cannot stay. They cannot have that type of a trance that they hold you in, but for so long, not that it would damage you, but it would damage them. So they can't do it only for a little bit of time. And from there, I realized that the blondes, as I call them, were ever present in almost everything that has happened to me. They're always telling me things. I see them in dreams. I see them, just appearing. And I tell my audiences, I say, if you really want to know where to find the blondes, just go to McDonald's. And of course, they start laughing at that. And I say that because that's where I've seen two of them. I don't know what it is, but they like McDonald's. So, and they talk to me and they tell me things. And then they always say, now, I will never see you again. This conversation will never happen again. And I'm always thinking, well, that's odd because I didn't even suggest that it should. But since you've said that, thank you very much. So that's what has been happening. So it's all of those kinds of things and much more that has happened.
Wow. Wow. Well, I'm curious. I know part of your research and part of your presentations that you've given deal with the Native American traditions and the overlap that the Native Americans have in their legends and their lore and even in their written history of interacting with star beings. Mm-hmm. They've referred to them as star beings, yes, and they've done drawings of them, mm-hmm. and they have claimed that the star beings have really influenced their understanding and their lineage of the past and the future for them. Hmm. So I want to know how you discovered your partial Native American roots and how that part of the journey wove its way into your awareness of the star being culture. Mm.
Well, let's see. Well, first of all, I am a descendant of a woman named Caroline Branham. Caroline Branham was a personal maid to Martha Washington. She came with Mrs. Washington from the Custis family. Mrs. Washington, if people do not know this, was married to Daniel Custis before she married General George Washington.
I did not know that.
So that's where these Branham children were all there somehow in what was called the White House, which is how the White House got its name, because this was a prominent family associated with General Washington, so they called their home in Virginia the White House, and that's what happened. But Caroline came, and she was in part Buffalo Ridge Cherokee and Monacan, because those groups had come together. One was just over the little hill from the other, so they had intermarried quite a bit. And up until recently, the chief of the Monacans, of the Buffalo Ridge Cherokee, had the last name Branham, so it's still functioning there. She was a descendant, as we understand it, from the Buffalo Ridge Cherokee and some of the English a sea captain and his crew that came and found their way into Amherst County in Virginia. And so as they came to Mount Vernon, a lot of what they brought with them was shared there. I was able to give a program at Mount Vernon in which we had an entire stage filled with Native people, and they all gave presentations and named some of the Native people who were there at Mount Vernon. Now, what's interesting is that when people talk about the enslaved people of Mount Vernon, they never never talk about the native people. But not only were they at Mount Vernon, but they were at all of the places all around. And because that's where native people and African people met. They met there on the plantation, and that's where they came together to create family. So there's that part of it. Also, my mother's father, mother, was also native, and I believe she was native mixed with English. And she hid during the Trail of Tears, and finally met a colored fireman who was at the time also acting as a waiting man for a Major Gibbs, I think it was, Captain Gibbs. And he married her and took her back to Livingston, Alabama, where they were all from. And so that began my connection with the Choctaw people. Now, strangely enough, through some family connections there, I eventually, by working with Arena Stage, was sent to California, where we were having this big international conference, and I was representing the theater there. So we met a lot of Native people there. We were there for the large Red Earth, conference that they had every year at the time, dancing and drumming. And I met a man there, and as we began to talk, we realized that we were from the same family, one branch that had worked its way into the African American community and one that had worked its way into the white community. And as a matter of fact, the dress that I have on now and several others was a gift from him, so that a Choctaw woman who would sew them just by getting my measurements over the phone
Wow.
actually could make these, and they'd show up, and here they are, But he too would give me a lot of information, and one of the things he did, and if I had my drum here, I would show it, is that the Choctaw people believed, as did many of the native nations, that they were brought here by star beings. And during the
Wow.
that's
impressive.
Yeah, I think they feel that's where they came from. Now, of course, social scientists will tell you that they migrated. They feel they came from there. So what they really feel is that there's a connection. They feel there's a strong connection. What I think is that they may have migrated. I will go along with that, but that they were visited, and that's what they remember. And maybe they would have some kind of an awakening, and that awakening was because of the relationship
Of star beings visiting. Yes.
Now, when I told you that my mother saw little blue men, I have now found out that most Native people do see the blue ones, the blue little people. So I don't know why, but they see blue people.
Well, there's a lot of Vedic tradition.
I was good. That's true.
If you look in any of the old Indian history, and of course in the Vedic stories, we don't really know how far back they go. Modern scholars know that this is a period of time pre-Buddha, but in order to just place it before Buddha, they've put it back at about 2,500 to 3,000 years, but it could be really more like a 30,000 year history or older.
That's
We
true.
really don't know. There's lots of beautiful drawings even from this period of time showing blue beings. So it's very, very interesting.
So, and I thought when my mother said it too, she was near the end of her life, her death, and her death to this life anyhow, to Earth's life. And I thought to myself, blue. So when she said that, I thought, oh, well, it was going to be, a good addition to all of the experiences I've had, but she said blue, and I've never heard blue before. I've heard, gray and whatever. I thought, well, at least, she was reporting something. And then I found out blue was exactly right. So then I thought, oh my goodness, my mother, she was trying to tell me something. And she was always seeing something. She was perhaps clairvoyant, because I am. I'm clairvoyant and clairaudient. And I suppose she was too, and so was my grandmother, and so was my great-grandmother, and so are my children, and so are my grandchildren. And we actually had an abduction of one of my grandchildren, and she was interviewed on a radio show, which I was hosting actually, and on XM radio, satellite radio. And that is really something. And I do bring that when I give the overview of my personal experiences. It is, if to hear a child at 11 recalling experiences at 4, 5, and 6, and through 8, you can tell. I mean, this is a child, so she's speaking from that experience, and it's most people that hear it they say they have chills, the hair is standing all up on their arms or their heads everywhere. They just, because she tells of how they lifted. She says they lifted her right up through the roof, and she says when she got there, they put her in a playground-like setting. And this is interesting because I heard another woman at another conference say the same thing, and I jumped up. I said, I didn't know I had jumped up, but I jumped up to say, wait, that's exactly what my granddaughter said, So I knew then that my granddaughter was indeed giving the same experience. And she said, Chupka, which is what she calls me, Chupka, she said, the thing about it is that they had playground equipment, and at the time she had never seen a seesaw, but they put her on a seesaw. But she said that everything was gray. It was like a dark gray, almost like a stage. So it didn't have any life to it, but it did have these pieces of equipment. And she said there was a woman there. And again, when I hosted the show, I had produced it with a woman from Seattle, Washington, who was a psychologist. And she said that though she has a large practice, she does talk with a lot of abductees, and she said this is quite common, that especially for children, they have a woman that looks like a human female woman there. And she said what was different was that my granddaughter said that she looked at this woman and she felt compassion for her. So she put her arm around the lady and tried to comfort her. And the psychoanalyst said, well, the difference is that in most cases, this a human-like woman puts her arms around the children, but your granddaughter we didn't say granddaughter, we just said, but the child, because I didn't want to identify her, saw something in the woman that she wanted to protect. So that said something about her communications there. But she said everything was fine. I asked her how did she feel about them, and she said that she felt that that was her family, which really surprised me because I was like, I've never heard that before, that they felt like family. So then she said that at some point there were the little people who brought her were the same ones all the time, little people. But she said one of the times when they took her, they were walking around, like they were a little bit concerned, agitated would be the better word. And so she looked at them and she was like, she was thinking to their thoughts, what's going on? And they were sending thoughts that someone was coming. Whoever was coming was not going to have been as kind as they had been. So their response was they wanted her to go home. They wanted to make sure she was taken home. So we don't know who that was. But they said to her, we will return to you later in this life or in the next, which I thought was very interesting. So, she said she levitated, or she saw them levitate, I think she said. She said they were rising up in the air, so they were levitating. And it was a very interesting experience. And, for a long time, my daughter, her mother, was afraid to talk about it. And finally, I was able to persuade her to allow the child to come on the radio show and actually participate in this interview because I thought it should be documented. Mm-hmm. And I was afraid if she waited too long, my granddaughter would learn of things and start adding things. And we wanted to, You
wanted to get her own clear interpretation, free of any contamination from other people's experiences.
And they did tell her, they told her she was thinking about me. And they said, oh, we know your grandmother. And they knew me by name. So we know her. I don't know how they know me, but they knew me. And my daughter called me one morning and she said, Mom, I have something to tell you. I said, I have something to tell you too. I said, who should go first? She said, you go first. I said, okay, wasn't that nice? You go first. I said, thank you. And I said, last night I dreamed that I was with Chupi, and we were rising up in, I don't know what, but it seemed to have like a glass dome of some kind. And I had full view of all the trees, and the trees were getting smaller and smaller. And Chupi was sitting on my lap. I said, and I felt, it was so comfortable. I didn't feel afraid or anything, but I just knew we were rising up. She said, Mom. I said, well, what? Yes? She said, do you know what I want to tell you? I said, no, what? She said, last night, Chupi said, they came for her again, but this time you were there. You put her in your lap, and she felt comforted, and she wasn't afraid. And of course, at that point, my daughter said, okay, Mom, I have to go, because that was before she became comfortable enough to really discuss it. But that's the kind of thing that happens.
Wow. So your granddaughter and you had the same experience the night before. Wow.
So we don't know.
You have to connect with Audrey Hewins, who runs the Experiencer Speak conference in Maine.
Okay.
I'll connect you. I'll make sure that happens. I got to speak there this year.
Oh, wonderful.
And it's a really great conference. And a lot of people were there. Travis Walton was there.
Oh,
Chris Bledsoe was there.
Yes, I know him very well. He's such a sweet man. Oh,
lovely man.
God, yes.
Lovely man. In Arkansas or North Carolina?
I think maybe it's North Carolina.
Yeah, I think it's North Carolina. Yeah, and some amazing UFO stories as well on his property.
Oh, I know.
Really incredible. So, I want to ask you a little bit more about what some of the messages are that you have been getting for Earth, for us as human beings, if you have messages to share.
Well, here's the thing. I always was hoping, where's the big message? I'm ready to deliver it to the world. And I think that the answer was, we will give you messages at the time it's important to you, and we're not, there's no star quality here. We're just trying to, help you along. It was so funny. So I thought, okay, I'll go along with that. And I remember that I was teaching a group of police officers. For about 3 years, I worked with the Bluefield Police Department, and where they were training all of the officers for Washington, D.C., the police officers. And
what were you training?
It was like a multicultural kind of, course. And some of them liked it and some of them didn't, but that's another story. But at any rate, while I was teaching them, I noticed that there was, such discord between the black officers, the white officers, the Hispanic officers, whatever, the men, the women. And I said, what am I going to do? How am I going to bring them together? And so one particular night, I was like sound asleep, and something just woke me up at like 4 in the morning, and a screen just came down, just like a movie screen. And they showed me exactly, I had always keep a notebook by my bed. I picked up the notebook, I put it there, started writing, and they gave me exactly the lesson. Exactly. And I went in that morning, taught that lesson, and then taught it every day for all of the years I was there. And the officers were almost weeping. That's how they were touched by it. So you know that there's something going on here. And so I think that that there are many ways in which they do work with us. And not always is it a big message to save the world, but I will tell you one thing. There was one time when I saw children who were starving in Africa, and it was a news report in one of the newspapers, and I said, doggone it, if there is any such thing, if you're there, I've seen you, whatever, but if you're there, why don't you help people? I mean, okay, it's nice for you to make appearances, but we need help, So the next month or so, of all places, the National Enquirer, which I always did think had sometimes the lead on stories, and they had a story about like a relief effort, that there were African children with teachers and others walking at night through these roads trying to escape some kind of war-torn area, and UFOs appeared, and they actually dropped down food, some kind of supplies and food for them. I mean, something that they could eat, could actually eat, and it was a big story. So I thought, wow, okay, thank you. I mean, that's the kind of thing I want to see. I don't want to, it's very nice to for all the other things to happen, and I'm very happy for everybody that does see them, you know, and all. But I think that there should be some positive interaction. So.
Wow, wow. Then, boy, do we need that right now
I
in
know.
the Philippines,
I
if there
know.
could be any kind of interaction there. It's,
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
you just never know.
No, you just never know. And I really think they do talk to us. They are there. I also have an inkling that we are connected to them somehow, and that's why they show up, and that's why they monitor certain families. I think that there's something that happens. I'll tell you a little story. I was working for a cable company, and all of the young women there were telling me about this wonderful man. Oh, they said, you must meet him. He's so intelligent. He's wonderful. Oh, they just oohed and awed. So I thought, wow, this must be an Adonis, a near Adonis. I'd like to see him, you know. Well, I finally met him, and he was a little man like that with pointed ears, the most peculiar looking person I'd ever seen. But they were right. He knew everything. He said, I'm very glad to meet you. I was waiting to meet you. I thought to myself, well, maybe they were supposed to move me in to meet, you know, to push me to meet him. He began a cable television project with me where we were going to go to visit the various scientists and physicists and record these wonderful interviews and that kind of thing. I was so excited. Well, not one of those interviews ever saw the light of day because there never was any videotape or anything. I could never understand what in the world was going on. And he came to my home, and my children were, you know, petrified. They said, Mom, don't bring him back here again. He feels odd to us, you know. And so one day I was looking for him. I wanted to call him and ask him, you know, what's going on with the videotapes? I mean, you never produce them? They aren't there? What's going on? And they said he wasn't there. But meanwhile, the director, I guess you would call him, of the cable company, called me and said, listen, I know you guys have been working on something. Have you talked with him? I said, no. He said, well, have you been by his home? I said, you know, no. I said, but here's his address. He said, no need of giving me that. I went by there. No such address exists. I said, really? And we never saw him again. But here's what he did for me. I had a counseling practice in my home, and he advised me how to protect myself, what to look for from these clients, and without his help, I have a feeling that something in the shadow world would have emerged somehow. So that's what he was there for. He said that. He said, I've come to give you this understanding. And he did. And then he was gone. So,
interesting.
Isn't that something?
Interesting.
It certainly is. So that's the kind of thing they do for me. Unfortunately, I've never been given anything that I must stand at the White House and tell.
Right.
But if I ever do,
well, it sometimes you may think it's an easier task than is really feasible to do. I mean, poor Steve Bassett has been out there with the Paradigm Research Group forever, and I admire him so. I give him tremendous credit for what he's doing, and he's continuing his cause, and he's finally gotten some financing behind him, and he may really be the one, you never know, we all turn to and say his name will go down in history for bringing about the real topic of disclosure to the American people and through the White House eventually. You never know.
Yeah, you do never know, because I suspect that they will come to someone like you, just a person who's out there trying to spread the word, trying to educate. And I can tell you, absolutely, they love to astonish people who consider themselves the ones to give this type of information to the public. They love, I'm trying to think of what I don't know, I can't, the word just won't come to me right now, but they love to take just someone who's really working hard, who they're in contact with, and giving you the message and then sending you to them and say, now you go tell them what we just told you.
Them.
Let them know that no, it's not going to come through you, it's coming through her. But you'll know it's right, because when you hear it, you're going to say, that's
the key they've been looking for.
And they love to do that. They love to do that.
It's a humor. Mm-hmm. There's real humor involved.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true.
Yes. Well, in my line of volunteerism, I'll call it, through MUFON, through attending conferences, going to them, meeting people, and also through the film work that I've done, I have met some amazing people who have had incredible encounters with craft and an extra telepathic sensory communication that's taken place. And they've said to me, Jen, you would never believe it. It was hysterically funny. The humor that was used and the lightness of heart or the lightness of being that was communicated was profound to them. And they were almost distrustful of it because it was so humorous. So I think we need to be very open-minded.
I think so. I think whenever they tell me anything, and there are just so many stories I could tell, it's just too many, but I'm the one that's filled with humor, and I'll say something to them like, well, that's an interesting thing that you've just said, and I'm just bowled over that you think that I can do this particular job, but let me try to explain something to you. I am a divorced mother of 4 children, and I have a lot of tasks on my plate. And I just go on and on and on, and they just sit. I can just feel it. They're just looking. And when I finally, worn myself down, they continue. You will be told where to go, what to do. And they don't pay me any attention. I'm just thinking, I love you all. You're just so wonderful, but did you just hear what I said? And they don't care, but I guess they know you can do this. And I do. And they let you know. Oh, there's just so many stories, so many, I can't even tell you. But that's the kind of thing, and I've met people that I should not have probably ever run into except for them, including President Ronald Reagan, who I had no reason to have any kind of contact with President Ronald Reagan. I didn't feel it one way about him, one way or the other. But I came to care for him and think that he was part of my responsibility to watch out for him like a guardian angel, so to speak. It was the strangest, most profound thing. And I knew where his cancer was months before it was told. And I knew something was troubling him. I saw him sitting silently outside the White House. There was no one around but the 2 of us. And it was so quiet that it was a profound silence, And a couple of years later, I was actually able to meet with a Republican congressman. And just to cut through to the chase, I was invited to go to the White House for a small honoring ceremony for women who were hoping to change the African American community. And of course, President Ronald Reagan came in, his little head doing anything, and he came in and he was going to give these awards and he was going to leave. So it was a very small auditorium, maybe seating 150 people, maybe that might have been too big. And as he turned to go, he walked through and he looked out into the audience, he was going to wave a little bit, and then he stopped and he peered out, and I thought, oh no. Let me tell you something. I'm just applauding like everybody else. There's nothing that I have in my hands. I'm not, and so then he walked off stage, and then he walked back, and looked out right at me again, and everyone in the auditorium looked at me like, oh, he knows her, I guess. Who is she? I thought, nobody. I'm just here. And the Secret Service men took, as I say, that famous one step forward and put their hands in their side of their pockets or whatever, And you know, and I said, no, nothing here, nothing in my hand. And that was the first time, though, that I realized that as I was seeing him, he was seeing me. So, and after that, I just became like a watcher for him. Isn't that odd and interesting? Because
so you two were entangled. You had a moment of entanglement in some way, in some dimension.
And you know, he believed
and
in.
then he recognized it.
He certainly did. And that's just one of many stories.
Wow. Wow. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Well, I think you and I are entangled too, Sunny. I think that we have work to do.
I think so too. Yeah.
As I am very much of the belief that there is a much older history to even our country here in the United States. There's probably a much older history around the entire world. But in the United States, we have tended to look at the Native American mounds and some of the Native artifacts we found, even ancient writing we found, and dismiss it as an out-of-place artifact, for a lack of a better definition of why this piece of, you know, carved slate or written hewn stone or something is found. And we really don't know who built the Native American mounds all throughout many states in this country. Namely, Ohio still has a large amount, but they're in Wisconsin and Mississippi and Arkansas. And I've studied crop circles and their relationship to the ancient mounds. And I think the crop circles drew my attention to the mounds, but now as I start to study about the mounds, and I see that there are mounds like this in China, they're all throughout Europe, they're certainly in England, and in those countries, even in Turkey, we look at them and date them as 4,000 to 5,000 BC. Well, how come our mounds in the United States are only 1,000 years old and they belong to the Native American traditions? And many Native American tribes said, no, we didn't build the mounds. They're not ours. They were here when we got here. We just protect them. We realize they're sacred space. We acknowledge them. And of course, they have astronomical alignments. They have star alignments. So whatever culture was building them with an awareness of equinox and precession and certain constellations that were right above them. So to me, this is a big connection to possibly star beings, or, you know, I mean, maybe we are entangled with living beings that are on other planets not that far away from us. We just haven't mastered the technology yet to understand how we can be traveling back and forth, and maybe they are watching us, watching us evolve and develop. Maybe we are their lineage, and they're watching us evolve and knowing when to come back in, like a parent or a grandparent does.
Exactly.
To an earlier, you know, offspring, and attempting to try to help or guide.
Well, it has to be something like that, because look at man. Man is so interested in other species. You know, we catalog them. You know, we do many things to them, and I just have to feel that other beings are doing the same thing with us. And every time I see one of these, the nature shows on Animal Planet or something like that, I always think to myself, when they wound the little fella and he falls out and they wrap him up in a netting and carry him up, I said, uh-oh, abduction experience. I mean, that's exactly what he's thinking.
That's what it looks
He's
like.
going to come back and he's going to say, I was abducted. And his other fellow, you know, deer or bear are going to say, no, you weren't abducted. What do you mean, abducted?
Right.
What does that mean? And that's what happened. He was abducted, and that's what happens to us. So why should it be any different? We want to find out, measure how they've progressed, and so maybe some are interested in us in the same way.
Yes, and maybe when we're abducted, we're tagged.
We're tagged,
or we're given a little RDF thing so they can find us again. And it's the same thing we do with birds and turtles and fish and things like that.
So
it is an odd way to look at the possible reality
I think so.
of the UFO phenomenon.
I think so.
Consciousness does play a role in it, and I do believe that consciousness is the next big frontier that we are about to really step into and more fully understand in a broader way than we ever have. I mean, there's so many amazing writers out there bringing us towards this. And even the internet is bringing us, I think, in a very unique way, closer towards understanding in a physical way, in an electronic way, what's actually happening on a telepathic medium. And it's really expanding our awareness at an exponential level.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah, there's many things to discover. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Radnor Studio 21 for the program with Mainline MUFON. We're really grateful to have you here. And I'd like to draw the watching audience to the attention of Mainline MUFON's website. If you'd like to know more about our ongoing programs, visit www.mainlinemufon.com. You can also look at archived programs there that we've had. It's an interesting and expanding organization. We are also interwoven with Noetic Sciences, which was founded by Edgar Mitchell, one of the, I think he was the 7th astronaut to walk on the moon. Edgar founded Noetic Science because of a very profound experience he had on his way back from the moon, where he was aware that he was not alone. And he felt a presence of consciousness surrounding him just outside the spacecraft, looking out into deep, velvety space, as he described it. It's almost like there was a huge conscious presence looking back at him. And so it forced him to want to start an organization where people would begin to explore a consciousness and the concepts of entanglement and precognition and ESP, and how do those things play into our evolution as a human species. So I hold 2 banners. One is for MUFON, one is for Noetic Science, but I could only have one website, so we made it Mainline MUFON. But we hope you'll visit the site and explore more there and come to some of our ongoing programs and conferences that we have. Thank you, ZSun-nee, so much for joining us.
Thank you. What a pleasure.